Monday Morning Matters.
Perspectives
From Southeast Asia.
Hi, good morning. This is Arlene.
This is Grace.
And of course, you are with us on our second segment of the day where we bring you discussion on Southeast Asia, this time on our Monday Morning Matters. We talk about the fate of Pakatan Rakyat. Will there be a rebirth of Pakatan Rakyat? With us is Professor James Chin. He is currently the Director of Asia Institute, University of Tasmania. Hi, how are you?
Good morning.
Morning.
So, before we start off with our discussion on Pakatan Rakyat, I just have one question. Were you surprised with this news of them breaking up?
Not really. I think when Pakatan was formed about 5 years ago, I think most people were of the impression that it's very difficult for Pakatan Rakyat to hold together a coalition when two of its key members, DAP, the Democratic Action Party, and Parti Islam PAS, had such different ideologies. So, for example, DAP has always stood for a secular state in Malaysia, while Parti Islam, from its very foundation, always wanted to create an Islamic state in Malaysia. Mm-hmm. Moreover, after the general elections last year, it was quite clear that many PAS people were disappointed with PAS performance in Pakatan Rakyat. And there were already many calls for PAS to leave Pakatan Rakyat immediately after the general elections in 2013. So no, I think most people are not surprised by recent events.
But did you predicted that they would have lasted two general elections?
Yes, I think what happened was during the last few years, basically the reason why Pakatan survived was the key role played by a very senior leader in PAS, Nik Aziz, the former Menteri Besar of Kelantan. Nik Aziz was a strong believer that you had to cooperate with DAP and PKR in order to capture the government in Malaysia. So when Nik Aziz died, it was quite clear that the Hadi Awang wing, the current PAS president, his supporters did not believe in cooperating with the non-Muslims. And therefore, I think the writing was on the wall that sooner or later, and it became sooner, that PAS would pull out of Pakatan Rakyat.
So in a way that, do you see that DAP and PKR, their reaction towards PAS because of what PAS have developed in recent times, were you surprised of them being, outraged of PAS suddenly turning to another side of the road and not sticking to the early coalition manifesto?
Well, I think for the DAP leadership, it was very clear that they knew very well where the past president Hadi Awang was coming from. They tried very hard to work around him, but they were not successful, and that's the reason why DAP announced earlier this year that they were cutting off all communications with the past president. I think for parties like PKR and DAP, their number one priority was to defeat the Barisan Nasional. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to hold the coalition together simply because they knew under Malaysian electoral system, the only way to beat the Barisan Nasional was to have an alternative coalition. And here PAS plays a very important role. Mm-hmm. PAS is the only party that can reach out to rural Malay voters. Both PKR and DAP are not capable of doing that. So they needed PAS as a key component of Pakatan Rakyat.
Do you think this still holds true for the next general election? That they still need PAS to to capture the rural Malay voters?
Yes. If you look at the Malaysia's electoral system, it is quite clear. If you speak in very general terms, there are three key groups in Malaysia. The first is the urban voters. The second is the rural, heavily Malay conservative voters in rural Peninsular Malaysia. Then you have the voters in Sabah and Sarawak. Mm-hmm. In order to capture power in Malaysia, you need to win two out of these three groups. So if you look at all the past elections for the last 2 or 3 general elections, the reason why Barisan Nasional has won is because they managed to capture the rural Malay vote plus the Sabah and Sarawak seats.
But
The opposition has done very well only in the urban areas. So in order for them to capture the federal government, they need to find a replacement party that can help them to penetrate the rural Malay seats in the peninsula.
But it's also not. It also seems that PAS hasn't really done well in the last general election when it comes to the rural voters. They lose out on Kedah, for example, and they didn't really manage to capture Terengganu.
Yes, and that is one of the reasons why they pull out. If you speak to the people who are supporting Hadi Awan, they made it very clear that they gave the so-called progressive wing in PAS a timeline for them to capture power. In other words, about 10 years ago, they decided that we will cooperate with PKR and DAP in order to capture the federal government. So after 3 general elections, since you have not been able to do it, there was no real reason for PAS to stay inside Pakatan Rakyat anymore. So this is how they will explain it.
Besides the short-term goal of capturing votes during general election, is there any substantive reason for the coalition to stay together? I mean, in the past they have this Buku Jingga. Have anyone forgotten about this? And what about the welfare state?
Buku Jingga is actually, if you want to put it crudely, is actually the manifesto of Pakatan Rakyat. Basically, Buku Jingga, at its most simplistic form, is a set of policies that all 3 parties agree to. In other words, it was a platform for the common areas where they agree. What the problem with Buku Jingga is that they did not list out all the areas that disagree. And unfortunately, the areas that disagree were the core things that led to the breakup of Pakatan Rakyat. And here I'm talking about the strong DAP stance on a secular Malaysia and PAS strong stand for Islamic State in Malaysia.
Interesting. Do you see that the reason why the Pakatan Rakyat couldn't hold together as well as Barisan Nasional is because they don't really dare to compromise, some of their hardcore stance on certain issue, unlike the Barisan Nasional, where they are still able to put up with certain issues, especially issues dealing with Malay rights.
I think you can't really compare Barisan Nasional to Pakatan Rakyat because the internal organization structure is very different. In the Barisan Nasional, you have UMNO, which is the linchpin. It is very clear that when you join Barisan Nasional, you have to accept the rules set up by UMNO, and this also means that you have to agree to the Malay dominance of the political system. In the Pakatan Rakyat organization is different. The Leadership Council of Pakatan Rakyat consists of 2 leaders from each of the component parties, 2 from DAP, 2 from PKR, and 2 from PAS. And therefore, you don't have an issue of one party dominating the whole Pakatan Rakyat. And therefore, you really can't compare.
And when it comes to DAP and PAS, do you think in the future for the next general election they would work together, or at least work out their differences to win seats? Because it seems like they were talks, especially in the news, that they would still cooperate together, but it will be like a sexless marriage in a way where they will just work together but not share the same ideals.
No, it is no longer possible for them to work together. It is quite clear that in the next general elections, PAS will not be a part of the Pakatan Rakyat coalition. The latest news coming out of Kuala Lumpur is that there is a group of people who are thinking of setting up a new Malay-based party that will replace PAS in the coalition.
And can you share more about that Malay-based party?
Well, the one that is most obvious is a group of progressive in PAS, and they are thinking of setting up a new political party based on the NGO called PASMA. But that is just one option. There's another group of people from PAS who thinks that PASMA cannot be used as a political vehicle. So they're thinking of setting up a completely new political party.
But it's still based on religion, right? But a more democratic and progressive interpretation of religion?
It is not so much based on religion, because the problem with religion in Malaysia, insofar as Islam is concerned, you cannot separate Islam from the Malay identity. So the easiest way of looking at it is that this new party, whether it's Islam-based or Malay-based, is essentially a party that can reach out to the conservative Malay voters in rural peninsular Malaysia.
And what are the characteristic of a new party if it were to rival PAS? How well that it needs to do, or it needs to present itself in order to be seen as serious as PAS to address issues on core Malay rural issues?
Well, I think if this new party, whatever it is, whether it's PASMA or any other new political party, if they can get the majority of the progressive PAS leaders who were recently defeated in the past Congress, if they can get them to join the new party, I suspect they will be able to find their footing fairly quickly. We know from past voting patterns in rural Malaysia, there always is a small group of people who will support the establishment of an Islamic State. On top of that, there's also a small group of people who will also support UMNO based on Malay nationalism. But a larger group of people is actually in the middle, the so-called middle ground. The votes of these people swing from elections to elections. So there is a market for a third group to come in and capture this market.
We will discuss more about PAS later on after this break.
Monday Morning Matters
Perspectives
from Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene.
Hi, this is Grace.
And of course, you are still with us on the topic about Pakatan Rakyat. Is there a rebirth of Pakatan Rakyat? Together with us is Professor James Chin, Director of Asia Institute, University of Tasmania. Earlier on, we discussed a lot about the breaking out of the relationship between all the Pakatan Rakyat coalition. Now let's focus more on PAS. It seems like a lot of more progressive PAS members are feeling, I would say, sadness, a pinch of sadness about the PAS direction to be of a more regional or state-based party rather than an inclusive party for Malaysia. Why do you think PAS has moved towards that particular direction? They are more confident being a Jago Kampung party.
Well, I'm not sure PAS is moving in the more Jago Kampung party direction. I think what has happened in PAS that essentially the conservative forces in PAS feels that they have allowed the other faction, the faction that believes in working together with the non-Muslims in Malaysia, they've given them enough leeway to work with them for the past 3 general elections, and they have not succeeded in replacing the Barisan Nasional. And because PAS did so badly in the 2013 general elections, they feel that now is the time to move back to the conservative mold. And they really believe that by moving back into the conservative mold, they will actually recapture a lot of the Malay votes they lost in the last general elections.
But according to Mat Sabu, the worldview of this ulama, who is mostly heading the Central Committee of PAS, seems to be very narrow and very biased. They think that the Malays are the center of, or the Malays in the rural area are the center of any form of policy or even power in Malaysia. But do you think what Mat Sabu concerns is true or not?
Yes, if you speak to the conservative people, and I've spoken to them quite frequently, you'll find that they are quite similar with UMNO in the sense that they strongly believe in the concept of Ketuanan Melayu. They believe that that Malaysia is Tanah Melayu, and they believe that the Malays should be politically supreme in Malaysia. But the difference between this group of Malays and the UMNO Malays is that the UMNO Malays do not believe in the establishment of an Islamic State straight away. Unlike this group, they strongly believe that all the problems that you see in Malaysia can be resolved if you have a Malay/Islamic State in Malaysia. So this is where the difference lies.
But has it been different from past struggle in the past during Burhanuddin times?
No, it was different in the old days for a simple reason that in the old days, the coalition was very dissimilar. In the old days, for example, the alliance, during the days of the alliance, it was quite clear that UMNO was not as powerful as it is today. And the political environment in those days were much simpler. For example, in those days, the religious thing and the racial thing were not as strong as what you see today in Malaysia.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So are you saying that in the future, actually, would PAS have more advantage because they hold, I guess, the authority more than other political parties when it comes to speaking about religion?
Well, I think what will happen to PAS now is that it is quite clear that the ulama faction is in power, and they will be projecting a party that is going all out to establish the Islamic State in Malaysia. This is also interesting for many people in Malaysia because how well PAS does in the next general election will give a clear indication of how big is the Islamic vote in Malaysia, because it is quite clear that with PAS no longer in the coalition, people who vote for PAS are basically voters who want the establishment of an Islamic State. So in that sense, it is very clear, and will be very interesting for many Malaysian observers to see how well PAS does. The general consensus among Malaysian observers is that PAS will not do very well outside the core Malay states of Kelantan, Terengganu, Perlis, and Kedah, and that this idea of an Islamic State has no real takers outside these four states.
But PAS didn't do well on the two states that I mentioned earlier, and in fact, they seem to be lacking in terms of knowledge and preparedness on issues that are worldly in matters, I would say, such as the recent floods, and in terms of the long, of course, the long issue regarding on development in Kelantan. How are they going to address that for the next general election?
But if you speak to the conservative people in PAS, they will argue that the Kelantanese people are really not interested in worldly material goods. They're more worried about their spiritual aspect as in what will happen to them after they die. And that's the reason why, although you see Kelantan, if you look at statistics on Kelantan, you see that it is far behind many other states in terms of development. But yet, PAS has been winning Kelantan for much of the time since Malaysia became independent. So I think the PAS strategy is essentially correct if they want to cement the Islamic vote in Malaysia. But unfortunately, the reality of Malaysia's electoral system is that if PAS does not join a bigger coalition, they will never be able to capture power in Malaysia.
So it's a strategy thing that PAS probably would be in dilemma. And because of that, you see an exodus of progressive PAS. For example, the recent news would be, like you mentioned, the PASMA, the youth leader Sheikh Omar has just joined DAP. In fact, a couple of PAS members, ex-PAS members, of course, they are joining DAP. What's so attractive about DAP? Has it really rebranded itself to be a more Malay-friendly party?
Well, DAP has never rebranded itself. I think what is appealing about DAP is that with DAP, you know exactly what you're going to get. DAP stands for Secular Malaysia, in which everybody is allowed to practice their own faith, and basically the question of faith does not come into the political equation, because under the concept of a secular state, religion is regarded as an individual private matter. So I think there are lots of Malays, especially in urban areas, who find this sort of ideology extremely attractive. One of the problems, the reasons why many of these Malay youth are unhappy in urban areas is that the way Islam is being practiced in Malaysia is that it is basically run as a bureaucracy. So you will find that in Malaysia, the Islamic bureaucracy like JAKIM and the state level JAKIMs are very powerful, and they dictate the lives and the behaviors of ordinary Muslims. Many Muslims, especially the one in the urban areas, are very uncomfortable with this. So they will be highly attracted to the DAP's ideology of a secular state, where religion is in a private arena.
So the current situation right now when it comes to how religion is handled in Malaysia is very top down. But it's interesting to see that those ex-past members only see it now like the way that they want religion to be a more private matter rather than being part of politics or economy. Why does this trend, it seems like?
Well, the trend is basically driven by the fact that the number of young voters will increase significantly over the next general election. And in 2 general elections' time, the younger voters will form the majority. I think DAP will do very well with the younger Malay voters. But the danger for the DAP is that at the organization level, the DAP is still a very Chinese-based party. So DAP also have a steep learning curve. They must learn very quickly to open up the organization structures especially for the non-Chinese members, especially the Indian and the new incoming Malay members. If the DAP can do this successfully, I would say the DAP will have a chance to penetrate the mixed areas in Peninsular Malaysia in the next 2 general elections.
Is there any party that DAP can learn from to adapt to a more multicultural framework of a political party? Maybe in parties in Sabah and Sarawak or something?
Not really. I think if you look at the political history of Malaysia, unfortunately, the record of multiracial parties are not very successful. For example, the most successful one was probably the PPP in the 1960s and 70s. And Ipoh, they were quite successful. But since then, all the multiracial parties in Peninsular Malaysia have not done very well. The most obvious one, of course, is Gerakan, which was set up specifically to be a multiracial party. But in the end, it ended up basically as a Chinese-based party. So no, the record is not very good. It all really depends on the leadership and the will of the leadership, whether they want to open up the party to a wider group.
It is interesting for you to mention that multicultural parties are not really that well accepted, especially Malaysia is a multicultural society. Why this is happening? Like, to answer that, like, would the future of DAP be a future that is also uncertain once they have too many applications from non-Chinese?
No, DAP, because of its strong stand on secular Malaysia and the fact that its ideology is essentially a multiracial ideology, the problem for DAP is that if they become too successful in attracting the young Malay members, then this will put them immediately in conflict with their partner PKR, because PKR is also in the same space. PKR is actually also a multiracial party, although PKR does not stand 100% for a secular state. That's only the difference. Other than that, PKR is essentially a Malay-based party, but also at the same time, they also promote the concept of a multiracial Malaysia.
And for the progressive parts, like Mat Sabu, Khalid Samad and all that, what do you see of their future? Will they remain in PAS and try their best to reform PAS like what they did in the last 2 general elections? Or would they, just get out and join other political parties or set up their own political parties? What would the trend be?
I think it's not possible to read their minds, because I think what is happening now is that they're going around the country speaking to their supporters, trying to get a feel of the situation on the ground. But what is clear is that even if they stay in PAS, they will not be given any positions of influence. Basically, the Hadi Awan faction in PAS is in full control of the party, and the party will remain conservative until the next general election. So even if this so-called group of progressive people stay inside PAS, they will not be given any meaningful role until after the next general elections.
We'll take another short break. When we return, we'll discuss more on the future of Pakatan Rakyat.
Monday Morning Matters.
Perspectives
From Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene and you're listening to Duran ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. We are still discussing about Pakatan Rakyat. Will there be another rebirth of a new political opposition party? And of course, with me is still Professor James Ching, Director of Asia Institute, University of Tasmania. We discussed extensively about DAP, PAS, and also the breaking up of PR. Let's talk about their main opponent here, which is Barisan Nasional. Do you think BN has, it is to BN's advantage for PR to dissolve?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that without a formal coalition, obviously Barisan Nasional looks a lot bigger and looks a lot better compared to the opposition. No. In some ways, having the opposition there allows the BN to concentrate all the election campaign against a single opponent rather than many different opponents. So the answer is yes and no.
Mm-hmm. But there will be many three-way fights in a lot of the different constituency. And would this actually make BN stronger?
It depends on where you talk about the three-way fights. For example, if the three-way fights happens in Chinese majority seats, it doesn't really matter. The Chinese community in the urban areas is still strongly Pakatan Rakyat. So the opposition will most likely win in urban areas, no matter how many candidates there are. But it does make a difference in the rural areas, especially in rural Malay heartland areas, where if there are 3 or more candidates standing, then it will be to a disadvantage of the opposition.
Mm-hmm. And talking about rural Malay areas, do you think PAS would think having a unity governance or unity coalition with UMNO to win votes in the rural Malay areas would be more feasible than before?
Well, it depends on the current leadership UMNO, whether they're willing to work with PAS at the state level. For some time now, there's been a political rumor that UMNO is willing to work with PAS, not at the federal level per se, but at the state level. So, for example, it is feasible for UMNO to come together with PAS and they jointly control the Malay heartland states. That model has worked for Barisan previously, and I don't see a big problem with that. But I think it will be quite difficult for PAS to join Barisan Nasional collectively as a party. I think many of the PAS grassroots members will not accept PAS joining Barisan as a component party members. Mm-hmm. But I think they will welcome some sort of agreement with UMNO so that they can jointly win the states of Kelantan, Terengganu, Kedah, Perlis, and even Kedah.
Mm-hmm. That's more towards the Malay rural heartland. But what about Sabah and Sarawak? Do you think the dissolving of Pakatan Rakyat didn't really impact that much on the voting pattern of Sabah and Sarawak? Or would they?
Well, you need to know that PAS has never really done well in Sabah or Sarawak. And in fact, in Sarawak, if you look at the PAS candidates in the past, most of them have actually lost their deposits. To get your deposit back, you only need to win 1/8 of the vote. So PAS has always done very, very bad, especially in Sarawak. In both Sabah and Sarawak, PAS never had a strong foothold. So whether PAS is a member of the coalition or not will have no big impact.
Mm-hmm. So actually, the breaking up of Pakatan Rakyat is still very much a challenge for DAP and PKR in a way that it's not just having challenges in Sabah and Sarawak, but now it has a huge challenge to win more votes in the rural Malay heartland. How are they going to do so? Do you think they are too optimistic with the breaking up of the Pakatan Rakyat?
Are you talking about the
DAP
PKR and DAP? Yes. Well, as I mentioned earlier, they need to find another party which can represent the rural Malay voters, and that's the reason why everybody is scrambling to find a new political vehicle for the group of progressive MPs who have left Pakatan Rakyat. Who have left PAS.
Mm-hmm. And with that, early last week especially, there were rumors that apparently Nazir Razak and Saifuddin might create a political party, but it ended up being just an NGO. Do you think there's a trend here to influence the voices of moderate Malaysians by forming NGOs to get them to I guess, to vote for the opposition but not necessarily pass?
Well, I think for a very long time now, this trend actually started during the administration of Mahathir. As you know, Mahathir was a strong authoritarian leader, so he did not allow people a lot of political space. So during the 1980s and 1990s, when he was a prime minister, many of the middle class felt that the only way for them to create a voice in a political space, they had to form or join an existing NGO. So this is nothing new. The problem with NGOs is that although you can affect the way people think about things politically, if you do not put candidates up or you do not join a political party, you cannot guarantee that what you believe in or the issues that you push, you cannot guarantee that this will be implemented because you're not part of the political process. You're still outside the mainstream of the political process.
So another way that it's 50-50 when it comes to how NGOs, these political inclined NGOs, would influence the voices of the masses to vote for whatever political party that they want to influence the masses to vote.
Yes, I think the way it works in Malaysia is that most people use NGO as a training ground to identify key political activists. And from there, you bring them into the formal political process by picking up the most active people from the NGO and asking them to join the political parties. So in some ways, the NGOs in Malaysia has generally been seen as a training ground for future politicians.
Let's talk about the issues that the new DAP, PAS and PKR would hold, since now they are separate with each other. But before that, we'll take one short music break.
Monday Morning Matters
Perspectives
from Southeast Asia.
Hey, this is Arlene. You're back with me again on our Monday Morning Matters, and of course with Professor James Chin, Director of Asia Institute, University of Tasmania, on the topic about Pakatan Rakyat or its future. Will there be a new Pakatan Rakyat? Before we talk about Pakatan Rakyat as a whole, let's talk about the issues that they will be carrying on, because it's quite superficial, especially when you talk about political parties, and most of the focus is mainly on how many votes they will win, what constituency that they will likely to win over, and who are their target voters or target audience. But less likely we actually talk about the issues that they carry, the policy change that they would make. So with the new breaking up of Pakatan Rakyat, do you see any changes in terms of what the kind of policy that they will hold strong to? Would PAS be more inclined to push for an Islamic state? What is their policy in terms of areas like development, not just religion, and how they view the future of Malaysia would be? The same goes with DAP and PKR. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, I think for the DAP and PKR, it's quite clear that they will still stick to the common policy framework, Buku Jingga. I think for PAS, it's quite clear that they've decided to move back into the conservative space. So the main product they're selling now is that if PAS wins the general elections, Malaysia will introduce the hudud and the full Islamic state. So that product is something that they can sell quite well in the rural areas, and is also a product that is easily understandable by the voters. But for PKR and DAP, I'm quite sure that they will stick to the agreement they had in Buku Jingga, even though PAS is no longer a member of the coalition.
And besides, when it comes to hudud law, what are the key policy issues that DAP and PKR will carry on forward more stronger for the next general election? Do you think DAP will promote its secular state ideal more strongly now, since that it has a huge threat on the issue regarding on hudud law?
I'm not sure DAP will make any fundamental changes, but the one area where DAP can really make a profound change in terms of the perception towards the party, something I spoke earlier about, is that DAP really have to decide fairly soon. When I talk about fairly soon, I'm talking about by the end of this year, whether they will increase or significantly increase the number of non-Chinese candidates, especially Malay candidates. Because one of the issues they had when PAS was in the coalition was that they were very limited by the number of non-Malay candidates they could stand. The reason why it's very important for DAP to increase the number of non-Malay candidates, non-Chinese candidates, is because this is a very clear signal to the population in that DAP is moving towards the multiracial space. Because the bulk of the Malay population now still sees DAP as a Chinese chauvinist party. And the same goes for PKR. PKR have to put up a lot more non-Malay candidates in order to move into that same space as well.
What about Sabah and Sarawak? How are they going to win over? Do you think that they should apply a more grassroots strategy?
Sabah and Sarawak has always been problematic for the opposition for a simple reason that in Sabah and Sarawak, you have two big problems that the opposition will have to overcome. One is an issue related to logistics. Sabah and Sarawak, in terms of things like roads, highways, access, transport nodes, they're still very far behind Peninsular Malaysia. So some of the seats in Sabah and Sarawak are basically jungle seats. So if you don't have access to a helicopter, it's very difficult for you to campaign. So that's one issue. The second issue that the opposition will have to overcome in Sarawak is the issue of money politics. Unfortunately, in the rural areas of Sabah and Sarawak, one of the key determinants of whether you can win an election is actually how much money you have. Vote buying is still a very common practice in rural Sabah and Sarawak, and is widely accepted as one of the key components of a successful electoral campaign.
And also for those who are on the fence, who during election they either don't vote or they might do last minute mindset change on who to vote. For this kind of people who are, unfortunately, majority of them are the younger generation, how can the opposition win over them? Because throughout the years, if you look at the voting patterns, a lot of them vote for the opposition not because they really believe in them, but mainly because they don't believe in UMNO or in Barisan Nasional. Let's say in the next 5 years, Barisan Nasional did well in terms of convincing they have the best policy, their economic policy is renewed, or they have a change of leadership in terms of the prime ministership. How do you think the opposition can win over for those who are on the fence in this?
Well, I think the survey has shown that the reverse is happening. In fact, the opposition is very successful with younger voters. The opposition in Malaysia basically rules the social media space in Malaysia. They've been very successful in using social media to reach out to the young voters. The issue is not whether they can get the support of the young voters. The issue is whether you can get the young people in Malaysia to register as voters. Because we know that a big chunk of them are actually not registered voters. They do support the opposition, but because they're not registered as voters, even if they want to vote on election day, they can't do it because they're not registered. So it's really an issue of restraining, putting these people on the electoral roll rather than trying to win their support.
And another area that I think also affect the younger generation is, of course, issue about religion. And in this case, I want to highlight on ISIS. Do you think the opposition parties have really addressed it in a way that they talk about such issue on a political party level?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Regarding on the issue of religious extremism, for example, ISIS, of course, you are seeing PAS gearing towards more on the area of Islamic State, but then you see DAP and PKR fighting for a more secular, or the separation between religion and state. But do they really address core challenges in 21st century Malaysia, especially regarding on ISIS? Have they create discourse among the younger generation on how to address this?
Not really. I think the issue of ISIS is very complex in Malaysia. A lot of it has got to do with the fact that many of the more radical Islamic elements in Malaysia, they conduct their activities underground, so it's very difficult to keep track of them. But what we do know is that Malaysia, interestingly enough, send more fighters to ISIS compared with Indonesia. Now, this is actually quite frightening because the Muslim population in Malaysia is only about 17 or 18 million, and yet Malaysia has contributed close to 200 fighters to ISIS, while Indonesia, who has a population of close to 300 million and close to 270 million of them are Muslims, they only contributed about 300 fighters to ISIS. So something is happening on the ground in Malaysia that are driving all these young people to join ISIS. Now, a lot of experts tell me that one of the reasons is because the Malaysian state has politicized Islam at a very, very high level. And there was also a great number of private madrasas operating in the Malay heartland states that created an environment for the ISIS ideology to be absorbed by the younger Malay population. Now, if the Malaysian state is not careful, these people will probably challenge the Malaysian state as well. We know from internal ISIS documents that they regard the Malaysian state or the current government in Malaysia as an infidel government. And the head of the special branch in Malaysia has actually come out in recent times to say that Malaysia is listed as one of the targets for ISIS.
I see. That's pretty scary. And for political parties in Malaysia, they still haven't sensed yet the extent of religious extremism in this country, even though we talk a lot about religion in this country.
Yes, the reason why the political parties find it difficult to talk about religious extremism in Malaysia is part of it has got to do with the fact that the discourse on Islam in Malaysia is basically monopolized by the ulama class. That's number one. Secondly, the discourse on Islam in Malaysia is controlled by the Islamic bureaucracy organizations such as JAKIM. They are the one who set the parameters for discussion in Islam. Anybody who says anything which they think that disagrees with them, that person will get charged. So that's the reason why it's very difficult to have a rational discussion on religious extremism in Malaysia.
And on the other hand, before we end the show, I guess I have a question to ask you about the future of Pakatan Rakyat, or at least individual party, DAP, PKR and PAS. Do you think the opposition, DAP and PKR, they will be able to win the next general election, even though a lot of the politicians in the opposition party seems to be very optimistic that BN will lose in the next general election? But do you think they are a bit too overconfident?
I'll answer you indirectly. If the current electoral system stays, in other words, if the current electoral system stays where it gives the advantage to the Barisan Nasional in terms of the number of seats in the rural areas, the number of seats in Sabah and Sarawak, and the way the boundaries are drawn, if the current electoral system stands, then it is highly unlikely the opposition will win the federal government. But if they can change the electoral system to make it fairer, then there is every chance that the opposition can win the next general elections.
So they need to face the first hurdle, which is redrawing the electoral boundaries in a way.
Yes, it's not only the boundaries, the whole system is geared. For example, we know that the election commission itself is actually very biased towards the Barisan Nasional. So unless they can change the current system, it will be very, very difficult for them to win the next general election.
With that, thank you very much, Professor James Chin.